Zambia prepares for the 2026 general elections, the NGO Wash Forum calls on all political parties, candidates and prospective leaders to make clear, measurable and adequately financed commitments to water, sanitation and hygiene. Joining us to speak more into this conversation is Mrs. Bubala Muyovwe Mumba, who is NGO Wash Forum coordinator. Good morning and welcome to the Diamond Breakfast.
Good morning and thank you for having us.
Well, happy to have you. Let's start off the conversation here, speaking into, just only 62% of Zambians having access to basic drinking water and just 37% to basic sanitation. Why has WASH remained a relatively low budget priority despite being essential to public health?
Thank you. That's a very important question. I think despite WASH having a critical connection to public health, in terms of the fiscal commitment, WASH is competing with several big giants. The debt servicing, external debt servicing, energy bailouts, and of course the high visibility infrastructure. So water, sanitation and hygiene, WASH as we call it, despite being the backbone of the water sector, has been losing out in the budget. And I'll tell you that one of the reasons why is because its benefits are preventative and they are largely invisible. Cholera shows up as a crisis, as a health crisis. It will never show up as an underfunded sanitation budget. Yeah.
Which is, I find it interesting that you're pointing that out. Like with us, our records have been every other year. We would have to be dealing with cholera and which is almost a shame that we get to witness this. But speaking more into WASH funding, which has fallen from about 2.5% of the national budget in 2020 to 1% in 2026, and who should take responsibility for this decline that we're seeing, and what level of funding does the sector actually need?
Okay, so one of the biggest challenges is that WASH does not have a big budget champion. Okay, it's spread across ministries and it's nobody's flagship, right? So in terms of the fact that you notice that politicians like to cut ribbons of the most beautiful things, water borehole, visible infrastructure like roads on schools, you will never find them at a toilet, right? And when you come and look at the allocations and how it has trended, I think there is no single government that we can blame for this trend. When I went back, instead of blaming, I think we can't blame any single government. When I went back 10 years, and in 2010, the allocation was sitting at around 2.6%. In 2011, it went up to 2.7%. In 2012, it went down to 0.5%. Between 2015 and 2019, it averaged between 0.5 and 2.4%. This year is the lowest in 6 years. We're barely at 1%. So if you ask me who is responsible, I'll say number one is the Ministry of Finance through the Treasury. They're the ones who make the ceilings, and of course they're under pressure. They have debt servicing obligations to meet, and then you'll find that I also can't let the Ministry of Water off the hook. They don't make a strong case, a strong argument for why water should be heavily invested, like the return on investment. That's possibly one of the reasons why we don't see it being one of the darlings of financing. And then also our ministry has also had a poor track record in terms of implementation. You have in Auditor General's report some projects remain unfinished, contractors are were paid in advance here and there, and now if I'm giving you the money and then you're asking me for more, it's very difficult to justify why should I give you more if your track record isn't good. You're also not giving me a good argument of why I should give you more, right? And then ultimately also it's the parliamentarians. They ultimately have a responsibility to hold the executive accountable. In the 8th National Development Plan, we've set targets that we were going to be financing between 3.5 billion a year. You have in this year you are financing less than that, 2.6 billion. What will happen in that gap, right? And then you're committing that we'll be committing 5% over the 5-year period. And here we are with barely 1%. And then you have parliamentarians who sit during an approval process and they approve this. Yeah, so even they have let us down in many respects, that they are not pushing back and honoring the policy commitments that we have made. So we set targets for ourselves, and then we don't adhere to those targets.
Does it surprise you from the parliamentarians? Does it surprise you especially that even when they're speaking during their campaigns, I don't think there's many of them that would talk into water, sanitation and hygiene. So even when they have that platform, does it surprise you that they don't stay so committed?
Well, I mean, water has been used in many campaigns. We are going to bring you boreholes. You hear it. It's there in the political rhetoric, right? But the actual follow-through has been weak. The money doesn't follow the speech. And unfortunately, this is a lived reality. It's a lived experience for people. Underfinancing a sector means that instead of me coming out, it's like you and me get to open the tap in the house. Someone else has to walk X number of kilometers. Sometimes they're waking up really early, right? That means you're taking away their economic time, the amount of time, even in your home. If you wake up and suddenly there's no water, the stress that you have to go through to make sure that everybody takes a bath, has a clean glass of water. I mean, the stress is immense, right? So it doesn't really surprise me. I think it's a great voting tool, but I think it's rather disappointing that the follow-through has been consistently weak.
And how does CDF complement where, you know, the budget does not?
Well, we were told in the beginning that CDF is a game changer, right? But even when you look at the guidelines, WASH is not listed. And I know that even the Ministry of Water really tried to push to the Ministry of Local Government to have an allocation for water and sanitation within the CDF guidelines. But they'll tell you that it's a demand issue. But I challenge you to go and comb through some of those CDF reports and see if people are not indeed asking for water. But if you really ask me the question, should water be competing? Is it something that people should compete for? That you're asking the poorest of people to write a proposal to the degree that me, Bubala, would write, give it to the local government. I mean, water is also very technical to put borehole specifications to that degree and then get the project approval for something that is a human right. To me, I think it is unfair.
How do you think then CDF can be incorporated to bridge that gap also? I mean, it's one thing, yes, we see it's not being budgeted for being considered, but if it is a cry and an ask within these communities, again, that is why it is also there to it's a constituency development fund. Therefore, it should fund, you know, a development of that sort. So how can that gap be bridged so that monies then are allocated also for water and sanitation?
I think without it being explicitly stated in the guidelines that water must be a beneficiary, so to speak, we and the communities who are asking for water will just be making wish lists at the end of the day. And I think asking even for 20%, even 10% to go towards water, sanitation and hygiene, I think is important, because you are building schools without facilities. Many of those schools that you see, the 2x3 classrooms, those schools, in response to the free education policy, which is a great initiative, you have now schools that are overstressed with insufficient facilities to respond to the increased pupil population, right? So you have healthcare facilities that lack water and sanitation. Imagine going to have a baby and you must come out and go to a hand pump, and can you imagine that? You know, the health risk, the hygiene, being able to take a clean bath, being able to bath your baby and make sure that you don't catch a hospital infection while you're in the healthcare facility. I mean, at the barest minimum, water is at the heart of all this conversation, at the heart of education, at the heart of inclusion for persons with disability. If the water point is at you're old, you're aged, it means you must rely on the youth within the community to walk a further distance versus having it within your reach, right? So, and then for sanitation and hygiene, that is even further compounded. You don't have clean water. How are you going to wash your hands? How are you going to maintain clean, how are you going to maintain good hygiene, right? So I think those are some of the things that we had hoped CDF would do, and maybe going forward, those are some of the considerations that should happen, that a thing like water should not be competed for. It should be an automatic.
I'm very surprised that it's not a priority.
No,
That's a very strange thing, especially looking at the needs of many communities. Is water sanitation at top of the list?
You know, they'll tell you that it must be driven by demand. So if the community demands, and if you're lucky, they say, oh no, that community has a larger population than you guys, so you guys now have to wait.
No.
Yes.
Wow, that's unfortunate that we're there. Let's take it to also just climate pressures, the increasing climate pressures as we are facing, you know, droughts and floods. What immediate investments then in climate resilient water infrastructure should be prioritized by any government?
Thank you. I think one of the things that I would hope that we can see for Zambia is build once, build to last. You know, very often for water infrastructure, we will pick the cheap end of things. You say, oh no, you know, the community won't be able to sustain it. So we'll pick a hand pump component that we know will rust, and then with time, that hand pump is abandoned, right? So in the same vein, for climate infrastructure, I think one of the things that the next government should prioritize is groundwater, right? We need deeper boreholes because, you know, I mean, once upon a time we were drilling boreholes at 50, 30 meters. Now we are going to deep depths, 150 meters. And I think we need to invest not only in going to a deeper depth, but we also need to invest in alternative sources of how we pump that water, and we need to invest more in solar. But also we need to protect those groundwater sources because we can't just be abstracting. We need to protect them, we need to earmark them, we also need to invest in other technologies like small dams, rainwater harvesting. Certain parts of Zambia receive medium to high rainfall. Some of that water can be harnessed, you know, and used over the year. And I think also flood proofing, you know. Zambia, I think a lot of our climate issues center around water. You know, even in the last drought, it was the dam dried. It's either it's flooding, but it's always centered around our climatic events center around water. And so I think that we need to invest in infrastructure that can withstand some of these climate shocks. And for urban areas, I think we need to diversify our water sources. Some cities or towns are heavily reliant on one river. If it dries, then what happens, right? And the flooding, we need to be a bit more proactive, you know, and rather than reactive. Everything is a firefight. Look at what happened in Nundazi. It just happened one day, right? But I'm sure the team at the meteorological department will probably tell you that data was sitting for months, right? Now we have a super El Nino event. You have farmers who are getting ready to plant. We have communities who have to, if those boreholes dry, means they have to walk further distances to collect that water. Do those people in itself also poses a risk? Because when you are rationing, demands for water don't wait. It means now you start relying on an unsafe water source. You start relying on a shallow well, which we ideally shouldn't. And that in itself is a vicious cycle that will take us back to a disease outbreak and so on and so forth.
In conclusion, how should the electorate also hold these leaders accountable? Because that water sanitation is part of their campaigns. Everyone talks into water. Yeah, we hear it all the time, right? It keeps coming up. It's part of their campaigns, part of their promises to the people. How should the people then hold them accountable?
I think first, anybody who's making a promise, I think the promise must be checked. If their manifesto just says we will provide access, for me that means nothing. Walk away, because you can't hold anybody accountable for that. And I think a real promise has a starting date, it has a target, and it has a budget, right? So for me, for the forum, I will say that our political commitments must show that the budget will be put in law, right? Currently, we had a water supply and sanitation bill which went to State House. And as a sector, we were extremely excited because it was going to contemporize and modernize the water sector in a new way, strengthen coordination amongst actors, right? It hasn't been assented to, right? Water needs to move beyond being a charity as a favor. It is a human right. And I think one of the things that we would like to see is that we must demand for specific targets for rural areas, for women, for persons with disabilities, you know. Any party that is not committed to a number is not serious. It's just a slogan and it's not a plan. So for the forum, I think we want to see some of these things backed up also by law. CDF, as we have said, must have an earmarked amount that responds to the WASH needs. So going forward, I think for the forum, we would like to see a budget that not only, if you tell us you're going to give us 100 kwacha, at least give us 90% at the very bare minimum. Commit to what you say. We're not even asking for more. At this point, give us what you allocate. We can't have scenarios where you promise us 2.1 billion, then in one financial year you give us 31 million. What happens to the gap, right? What happens to the people waiting for those services? So, and at the very least, I would really love to see a government that will put water and sanitation and hygiene as a right in our constitution. That for me would be a great day at the office.
Indeed. Well, we'll end there. Thank you so much for joining us on the Diamond Breakfast.
So much.
We've been speaking with the NGO WASH Forum coordinator, Mrs. Bubala Muyovwe Mumban, just talking into expectations also from our leaders. Remember, in 3 days we're heading to the polls. These are the things you need to consider even as they're speaking to you. What's important? Water is an important aspect to it also, but accountability on the leaders' end as well. Let's go on a break. When we get back, we get to understand what Meraki has to offer. Stick around.